The fluorescent lights in the hospital's vaccination clinic buzzed overhead as Sarah Martinez rolled up her left sleeve. It was just another Tuesday morning in March 2023, and she was there for her routine travel vaccinations before a business trip to Southeast Asia. The nurse, Jennifer Walsh, had given hundreds of these shots over the past few months. Nothing seemed different about this appointment. Sarah was a quiet woman in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She worked as a software consultant and rarely spoke about her past. She had moved to Portland, Oregon, 15 years ago and kept mostly to herself. Her neighbors knew her as the woman who walked her dog every morning at exactly 7 o'clock and always nodded politely but never stopped to chat. "This might pinch a little," Jennifer said, preparing the needle. She had said these same words thousands of times before. Sarah simply nodded and looked away, staring at the motivational posters on the wall about hand washing and healthy eating. As Sarah pushed her sleeve higher up her arm, Jennifer noticed something that made her freeze. There, on Sarah's upper arm, was a tattoo that Jennifer had only seen once before in her life. It was a three-headed dog, Cerberus from Greek mythology, but this wasn't just any tattoo. The design was specific, detailed, and unmistakable. Below the fierce-looking creature were the words Echo Company and a series of numbers that Jennifer recognized immediately. Jennifer's hands began to shake slightly. She had to steady herself against the medical cart. 25 years had passed since she had last seen that exact tattoo design. It belonged to a military unit that had been deployed to a classified location in Central America in 1998. A unit that, according to official records, had never existed. "Excuse me," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That tattoo, where did you get it?" Sarah turned to look at her, and, for the first time since entering the clinic, her calm demeanor cracked slightly. She saw the recognition in Jennifer's eyes and knew that her carefully constructed quiet life was about to change forever. "I think you know where," Sarah replied quietly. Jennifer set down the syringe with trembling hands. She looked around the clinic to make sure they were alone, then pulled up her own sleeve. There, on her forearm, was a smaller version of the same tattoo, the Cerberus, but with different numbers below it. The two women stared at each other in complete silence for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. 25 years of secrets hung heavy in the air between them. "Bravo Company," Jennifer whispered, looking at her own tattoo. "You were there," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Jennifer nodded slowly. She had spent decades trying to forget what had happened in that jungle in Guatemala. She had become a nurse partly to save lives, to somehow balance out what she had been forced to do during those 3 months that officially never happened. "How many of us are left?" Sarah asked. Jennifer shook her head. "I don't know. I've been wondering that for 25 years. The vaccination clinic suddenly felt too small, too bright, too normal for the conversation they were having. These were two women who had shared an experience that had changed them forever, but they had never expected to find each other again. Sarah had been a communications specialist with Echo Company. She was 19 years old when they deployed, fresh out of advanced training and eager to serve her country. She thought she was going to help with a humanitarian mission. The briefing had mentioned something about providing security for aid workers in a region affected by natural disasters. Jennifer had been a medic with Bravo Company. She was 21 and had joined the military to pay for medical school. She wanted to help people, to make a difference in the world. She never imagined that her first real deployment would haunt her for the rest of her life. Neither of them had known about the other companies involved in the mission. The operation had been compartmentalized, with each unit receiving only the information they needed to complete their specific tasks. It wasn't until they all arrived at the staging area that they realized how large the operation actually was. "Do you ever have the dreams?" Jennifer asked. Sarah's face went pale. "Every night for the first 10 years. Now maybe once a month. The helicopter sounds? And the smell of burning fuel." They both fell silent again. In that sterile clinic room, they were transported back to a place they had tried so hard to forget. The humidity that made your clothes stick to your skin within minutes. The constant buzz of insects. The way the jungle seemed to swallow sound until you couldn't tell if that noise was a bird or something much more dangerous. "We should talk somewhere else," Jennifer said, glancing at the door. "My shift ends in 2 hours." Sarah nodded. She had called in sick to work that morning, claiming she felt unwell. It wasn't entirely a lie. She often felt unwell on Tuesdays. Tuesdays were when it had all started, 25 years ago. "There's a coffee shop on Hawthorne," Sarah said. "Quiet place called Grind Coffee. Do you know it?" "I'll find it." Jennifer finished giving Sarah her vaccination in silence. Both women were lost in their own thoughts, trying to process this impossible coincidence. Portland was a big city. What were the odds that two people from the same classified military operation would end up living in the same place, let alone meeting like this? As Sarah rolled down her sleeve and gathered her things, Jennifer made a decision that surprised even herself. "Sarah," she called out as the other woman reached the door. "Before you go, how much do you remember about command?" Sarah stopped walking but didn't turn around. "Everything," she said quietly. "I remember everything." "So do I." Sarah finally turned around. "Then, you remember what we were told would happen if we ever talked about it?" Jennifer nodded. 25 years. They said the classification would last 25 years. That was last month. I know. The two women looked at each other across the small clinic room. 25 years of silence was about to end. 25 years of carrying secrets that had shaped every day of their lives since. 25 years of wondering if they were the only ones left who knew the truth about what had really happened in that jungle. "Grind coffee," Sarah repeated. 2:30? "I'll be there." After Sarah left, Jennifer sat down in the chair where her patients usually sat. Her hands were still shaking, and she felt like she might throw up. She had built a good life in Portland. She was married to a kind man who taught high school history. They had 2 teenage children who were good students and played sports and had never heard their mother wake up screaming in the middle of the night. But now, sitting in that clinic, she realized that she had never really stopped being that 21-year-old medic who had seen things that weren't supposed to exist. She had just gotten very good at pretending to be someone else. She thought about the others from her unit. Martinez from Echo Company was alive, apparently living under the name Sarah Martinez. But what about Rodriguez, who had been with Delta Company? Or Chen from Alpha Company? What about Lieutenant Morrison, who had led Bravo Company and had promised them all that what they were doing would save lives? Jennifer looked at her watch. 4 hours until she would learn some answers to questions she had been carrying for most of her adult life. 4 hours until she would have to decide whether to open a door she had kept locked for 25 years. She picked up her phone and almost called her husband to tell him she would be late getting home. But what would she say? How could she explain that her past had just walked into her clinic wearing a tattoo that proved everything she had tried to forget was real? Instead, she put the phone back in her pocket and tried to focus on her remaining patients. But every time she gave an injection, every time she rolled up someone's sleeve, she thought about that Cerberus tattoo and what it represented. By the time her shift ended, Jennifer had made up her mind. 25 years was long enough. It was time to find out what had really happened to the lost platoon, and whether any of the promises they had been made were actually true. She drove to Grind Coffee 30 minutes early and sat in her car, watching people come and go. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that two women were about to have a conversation that would change everything they thought they knew about their own past. When Sarah arrived, she looked different than she had in the clinic. More alert, more watchful. The way she scanned the street before entering the coffee shop was pure military training, even after all these years. Jennifer followed her inside, and they found a table in the back corner, away from other customers. For the first few minutes, they just sat there, drinking coffee and studying each other's faces, looking for traces of the young soldiers they had once been. "I need to ask you something," Jennifer finally said. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." Sarah nodded. "Do you think we were the only survivors?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she finally answered, her voice was barely audible. "No," she said. "I think there are others. And I think they've been looking for us." Sarah's words hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither woman could put out. Jennifer felt her stomach drop. She had spent 25 years hoping that what happened in Guatemala had been forgotten by everyone except the soldiers who lived through it. The idea that someone might be looking for them had never occurred to her. "What do you mean, looking for us?" Jennifer asked, keeping her voice low. Sarah glanced around the coffee shop again. Even after all these years, the habits were still there. Always check your exits. Always know who's watching. Always assume someone is listening. 3 months ago, I got a phone call, Sarah began. Wrong number, supposedly. But the person asked if I knew anyone from Echo Company. When I said no, they hung up. But, Jennifer, they knew my current name. They knew where I lived. Jennifer felt cold despite the warmth of the coffee shop. "Did you recognize the voice?" "No. But it was a woman. Young sounding. Like she was reading from a script." "Have there been other calls?" "No calls. But, last month, someone broke into my apartment while I was at work. Nothing was taken. Nothing was disturbed. But, I could tell someone had been there. They were good, but not perfect. My alarm clock was off by 3 minutes. I always check it before I leave for work." Jennifer's mind raced back to her own recent experiences. Had anything unusual happened to her? She thought about the man who had approached her in the grocery store 2 weeks ago, asking if she had ever lived in California. She had said no and thought it was just small talk from a lonely stranger. Now she wondered if it had been something else entirely. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. But first, I need to know exactly what you remember about the mission." "All of it." Sarah leaned back in her chair. The question she had been avoiding for 25 years. The memories she had worked so hard to bury. "We were told it was humanitarian aid," she started. "Security detail for doctors and engineers working on a water purification project in rural Guatemala. 3 months deployment. In and out, nice and clean." Jennifer nodded. That matched her briefing exactly. "But when we got there," Sarah continued, "there were no doctors. No engineers. No water purification anything. Just us and a bunch of military contractors who wouldn't tell us their real names. And the facility. That wasn't supposed to exist either." Both women fell silent, remembering the concrete bunker hidden deep in the Guatemalan jungle. It had taken them 2 days of hiking to reach it, and, when they finally arrived, they understood that nothing they had been told about their mission was true. The facility had been built into the side of a hill, hidden under layers of vegetation that had been carefully cultivated to look natural from above. The main entrance was barely visible, even when you were standing right in front of it. Inside, it was larger than any of them had expected. 3 levels underground, filled with equipment that none of the soldiers recognized. "Do you remember Dr. Kellerman?" Sarah asked. Jennifer's blood ran cold. Dr. Friedrich Kellerman had been the civilian in charge of the facility. He was a thin man in his 60s with pale skin that never seemed to tan despite the jungle heat. He spoke with a slight accent that could have been German or Austrian or Swiss. He never told them where he was from, and nobody had the clearance to ask. "I remember him," Jennifer said. "I remember his experiments." Dr. Kellerman had been working on something he called Project Cerberus. The name hadn't been chosen randomly. In Greek mythology, Cerberus was the 3-headed dog that guarded the entrance to the underworld. Kellerman's project was designed to guard something too, but not the underworld. It was designed to guard secrets. "The subjects," Sarah whispered. Jennifer closed her eyes. She had tried for 25 years to forget about the subjects. Men and women who had been brought to the facility against their will. People who had been reported as missing or dead in their home countries but were very much alive in Kellerman's underground laboratory. "How many do you think there were?" Jennifer asked. "During our 3 months? Maybe 30 that I saw. But the facility was designed for more. Much more." Jennifer had been the medic responsible for keeping the subjects healthy enough for Kellerman's experiments. She had been told that they were volunteers, political prisoners who had agreed to participate in exchange for reduced sentences. But volunteers didn't need to be restrained. Volunteers didn't try to escape every chance they got. The memory work, Sarah said. That had been the worst part. Kellerman had been developing techniques for selective memory modification. Not brainwashing, which was crude and obvious. Something much more sophisticated. The ability to remove specific memories while leaving everything else intact. The subjects would be brought into the laboratory conscious and aware. Hours later, they would emerge with no memory of what had happened to them during that time. Some of them forgot years of their lives. Others forgot specific people or events. A few forgot everything and had to be taught how to speak and eat and walk all over again. "I tried to help them," Jennifer said. "I tried to document what was happening so I could report it when we got back." "I know. I saw your notes." Jennifer looked up in surprise. "You saw them? Communications specialist, remember? I was monitoring all transmissions in and out of the facility. That included internal memos and medical reports. I read everything you wrote." Jennifer had written detailed reports about each subject, documenting the procedures they underwent and the effects she observed. She had hidden copies of these reports in her personal belongings, planning to turn them over to proper authorities once the mission was over. "Where are those reports now?" Sarah asked. "Destroyed. The day before we were supposed to fly home, 2 MPs came to my quarters and took everything. They said it was routine security screening. I never saw any of it again. Same thing happened to me. All my communication logs, all my equipment monitoring data. Gone." The 2 women sat in silence, remembering those final days at the facility. Something had gone wrong with one of Kellerman's experiments. A subject had died during a procedure, and then another, and then several more in a single day. The facility had been put on lockdown. "Do you remember Morrison's meeting?" Sarah asked. Lieutenant Morrison had been Jennifer's commanding officer. 3 days before they were scheduled to leave Guatemala, he had called a meeting for all U.S. military personnel at the facility. About 40 soldiers in total, representing 5 different companies that had been told they were part of separate missions. Morrison had stood in front of them in the facility's main briefing room and delivered a speech that Jennifer could still recite word for word. "What you have seen here in the past 3 months is classified at the highest levels of government," Morrison had said. "The work being done at this facility is vital to national security. It has the potential to save thousands of American lives and prevent conflicts before they begin." He had gone on to explain that Project Cerberus was a defensive measure. The techniques being developed would be used to remove traumatic memories from soldiers suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They would help prisoners of war forget the torture they had endured. They would give victims of terrible crimes the chance to live normal lives again. He made it sound noble, Sarah said. But we knew better. They had seen how the techniques were actually being used. Political dissidents who forgot why they had opposed their governments. Journalists who forgot the stories they had been investigating. Witnesses to war crimes who forgot what they had seen. Morrison had concluded his speech by telling them about the tattoos. Each soldier would receive a small tattoo before leaving Guatemala. The tattoo would serve as identification to other members of the project. More importantly, it would mark them as people who could never speak about what they had seen. 25 years, Morrison had said. The classification on this project will be reviewed in 25 years. Until then, any discussion of Project Cerberus or this facility will be considered an act of treason. The tattoo artist had been a woman who spoke no English. She worked quickly and efficiently, giving each soldier a variation of the Cerberus design. The exact details varied by company and role, but the central image was always the same: the three-headed dog, guardian of secrets. Did you ever try to find out what happened to the others? Jennifer asked. Once. About 10 years ago, I hired a private investigator to look for Rodriguez from Delta Company. We had been friends during training. Did he find anything? Sarah shook her head. Rodriguez died in a car accident 6 months after we got back from Guatemala. Single car crash on a straight road in perfect weather conditions. Jennifer felt sick. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. The investigator also looked into 3 other names I gave him. 2 more car accidents and 1 apparent suicide. All within the first year after the mission. The coffee in Jennifer's cup had gone cold, but she didn't notice. She was thinking about her own return from Guatemala. The debriefing sessions that had gone on for weeks. The psychological evaluations. The medical tests. The constant reminders about the consequences of breaking their oath of silence. Jennifer, there's something else I need to tell you, Sarah said. Something I discovered about a year ago. What? Project Cerberus didn't end when we left Guatemala. Jennifer stared at her. What do you mean? I mean the project continued. Different location, different subjects, but the same work. And I think some of our people went with it. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a newspaper clipping. It was from a small-town paper in Nevada, dated 18 months ago. The headline read, "Local man dies in hiking accident." The accompanying photo showed a man Jennifer recognized immediately. Staff Sergeant David Chun from Alpha Company. He was older in the photo, with gray hair and laugh lines around his eyes, but it was definitely him. Chen was living in Nevada under the name David Chang, Sarah explained. According to the article, he fell from a cliff while hiking alone. But, look at this. She pointed to a paragraph near the end of the article. It mentioned that Chang had been employed by a private security company called Cerberus International. That can't be real, Jennifer said. It's real. I've been researching Cerberus International for months. It's a legitimate company, incorporated in Delaware, with offices in 12 countries. They specialize in what they call memory therapy for trauma victims. Jennifer felt like the room was spinning. They're still doing it. And they're using our people to do it. Jennifer, I think everyone who survived Guatemala was given a choice. Join the new version of the project, or end up like Rodriguez. Sarah nodded grimly. I think Shen tried to leave Cerberus International. And I think that's why he's dead. The 2 women sat in silence, processing the implications of what Sarah had discovered. Project Cerberus hadn't been a single military operation. It had been the beginning of something much larger and more permanent. How many of us do you think are still alive? Jennifer asked. I don't know. But I think we're about to find out. What do you mean? Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Jennifer a text message she had received that morning. It was from an unknown number, and it contained only an address in Portland and a time, 8 p.m. tonight. I got this 3 hours ago, Sarah said. Right after I left your clinic. Jennifer stared at the address. It was only 6 blocks from where they were sitting. Are you going to go? Sarah looked at her with the same expression she had worn 25 years ago when Lieutenant Morrison had asked for volunteers for a dangerous reconnaissance mission. Yes, she said. But, not alone. The address led them to an old warehouse in Portland's industrial district. At 7:45 that evening, Jennifer and Sarah sat in Jennifer's car across the street, watching the building for any signs of movement. The area was mostly deserted, with only a few streetlights casting long shadows between the empty buildings. I count 3 possible entrances, Sarah said, her military training automatically kicking in after all these years. Front door, loading dock on the east side, and what looks like a fire exit on the west. Jennifer checked her phone again. 15 minutes. They had spent the afternoon trying to decide whether to contact the police or some other authority, but what would they say? That they were part of a classified military operation 25 years ago and now someone was sending them mysterious text messages? They had no proof of anything, and their story sounded impossible even to them. Instead, they had prepared as best they could. Jennifer had told her husband she was working a double shift at the hospital. Sarah had left detailed notes in her apartment about where she was going and why, along with copies of everything she had discovered about Cerberus International. Movement, Sarah said quietly. A figure emerged from the shadows near the warehouse entrance. Even in the dim light, they could see it was a woman, probably in her 40s, walking with the purposeful stride of someone who belonged there. "Do you recognize her?" Jennifer asked. Sarah squinted through the windshield. "Maybe. It's hard to tell from this distance, but she moves like military." Two more figures appeared, this time from the direction of the loading dock. Both men, both walking with the same controlled, alert manner. "Jennifer, I think these are our people." At exactly 8 o'clock, Sarah and Jennifer crossed the street and approached the warehouse entrance. The heavy metal door was slightly ajar, with warm light spilling out into the darkness. As they got closer, they could hear voices inside, not many, maybe 5 or 6 people talking in low, serious tones. Sarah pushed the door open and they stepped inside. The warehouse had been converted into a makeshift meeting space. Folding chairs were arranged in a rough circle, and several people were already seated. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she recognized faces she hadn't seen in 25 years. "Walsh. Martinez." The voice came from a man standing near the back of the room. Lieutenant Morrison, looking older and grayer but unmistakably their former commanding officer. He was wearing civilian clothes, but his posture and tone were exactly the same as they had been in Guatemala. "Lieutenant," Jennifer replied automatically, then caught herself. "Sorry, I mean. Just Morrison now," he said with a slight smile. "We're all civilians here." Jennifer looked around the room and began recognizing other faces. Maria Santos from Alpha Company, now with silver-streaked hair and wearing a business suit. Tom Bradley from Delta Company, heavier than he had been at 19 but with the same intense eyes. And, sitting in the corner, almost hidden in the shadows, was someone Jennifer thought she would never see again. "Rodriguez?" Sarah gasped. The man in the corner looked up and nodded. "Hello, Sarah." "Jennifer." "But you're dead," Sarah said. "Car accident. I had an investigator look into it." Rodriguez stood up, and Jennifer could see he was walking with a slight limp. "Car accident was real. Being dead was an arrangement." Morrison stepped forward. "Before we go any further, I need everyone to understand something. What we're discussing tonight puts all of us at risk. The people who ran Project Cerberus have spent 25 years making sure that no one could expose what happened in Guatemala." "Then, why are we here?" asked Maria Santos. Her voice was harder than Jennifer remembered, like someone who had learned not to trust easily. "Because the 25-year classification period ended last month," Morrison replied. "And because Cerberus International is about to go public." He walked to a laptop that was sitting on a folding table and opened it up. The screen showed what looked like a corporate website. "Cerberus International Technologies," Morrison read from the screen. "Founded in 2001, specializing in advanced therapeutic techniques for trauma recovery. Offices in New York, London, Berlin, Tokyo, and 12 other cities. Current estimated value, $8 billion. Jennifer stared at the screen. The website looked professional and legitimate, full of testimonials from satisfied clients and awards from medical organizations. Nothing about it suggested the dark origins she knew it had. "They've turned it into a business," Tom Bradley said with disgust. "They're selling what they did to us." "Worse than that," Morrison replied. "They're expanding it. According to documents I've been able to obtain, Cerberus International is planning to go public next month. Initial public offering of $2 billion. Rodriguez limped over to join the group around the laptop. Show them the client list. Morrison clicked to another page on the website. It showed a partial list of organizations that had used Cerberus International services. Jennifer recognized several government agencies, major corporations, and military contractors. They're not just treating trauma victims, Morrison explained. They're working with intelligence agencies to modify the memories of foreign agents. They're helping corporations erase the memories of employees who discover illegal activities. They're even working with wealthy individuals who want to forget embarrassing or inconvenient parts of their past. Sarah sat down heavily in one of the folding chairs. How is this legal? It's not, Maria Santos replied. But it's very profitable. And the people involved have enough money and power to make sure nobody looks too closely at their methods. Morrison closed the laptop and looked around at the assembled group. There are 8 of us here tonight. As far as I can determine, we represent about half of the original Guatemala team who are still alive and not working for Cerberus International. What happened to the others? Jennifer asked. Some died in accidents that weren't really accidents, Rodriguez said grimly. Some joined Cerberus voluntarily. A few just disappeared completely. And some of us, Morrison added, have been hiding for 25 years, waiting for the classification to expire so we could finally tell the truth. Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. You've been planning this for 25 years? Not planning exactly. But preparing. Gathering evidence. Documenting everything we could remember. Building a case. Tom Bradley stood up and began pacing around the room. Morrison, you keep talking about telling the truth. But who's going to believe us? And even if they do, what's going to happen to us? It was a question they were all thinking. Even if the classification period had expired, they had no way of knowing whether the people behind Project Cerberus would honor that timeline. Rodriguez's fake death proved that these people were willing to do whatever was necessary to protect their secrets. I've been in contact with a journalist, Morrison said. Someone who specializes in investigating government cover-ups and corporate crime. She's interested in our story, but she needs proof. What kind of proof? Sarah asked. Morrison walked over to a large duffel bag that was sitting in the corner of the warehouse. He unzipped it and began pulling out file folders, photographs, and various documents. Everything I was able to save from Guatemala, he said. Personnel records, mission briefings, photographs of the facility. I also have medical records from some of the subjects, and financial documents showing how the project was funded. Jennifer stared at the pile of documents. How did you keep all of this? They searched all of us before we left. I mailed it to myself, Morrison replied with a slight grin. Used the facility's own mail system to send everything to a post office box I had set up under a false name. By the time anyone realized what I had done, we were already back in the States. Maria Santos picked up one of the photographs. It showed the entrance to the underground facility, partially hidden by jungle vegetation. This could be anywhere. How do we prove this is Guatemala? We don't just have photographs, Rodriguez said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I've been recording my conversations with Cerberus International recruiters for the past 10 years. He pressed play, and the warehouse filled with the sound of a phone conversation. A woman's voice was offering Rodriguez a position with a private research company working on advanced psychological techniques. The conversation was careful and coded, but to anyone who had been part of Project Cerberus, the meaning was clear. They've been trying to recruit all of us, Rodriguez explained. Sometimes they're subtle about it, like that phone call. Sometimes they're more direct. Tom Bradley sat down and rolled up his sleeve, exposing his Cerberus tattoo. 3 years ago, someone approached me outside my apartment building. Knew my real name, knew about Guatemala, knew everything. Offered me a job with excellent benefits and guaranteed security. What did you tell them? Jennifer asked. I told them I wasn't interested. 2 weeks later, my apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, but they left a business card on my kitchen table. Cerberus International. Sarah shuddered. Same thing happened to me, but they were more subtle. Wrong number phone calls, strangers asking questions about my past. I thought I was being paranoid. Morrison gathered everyone's attention again. Here's what I think is happening. Cerberus International is planning to go public next month. That means they'll be under much more scrutiny from investors and regulators. They want to make sure that all potential witnesses to their origins are either working for them or silenced permanently, Maria Santos finished. Which is why we need to act now, Morrison continued. Once they go public and have billions of dollars at their disposal, it will be much harder to expose them. Jennifer looked around the room at her former colleagues. 25 years ago, they had been young soldiers following orders, not really understanding what they were part of. Now they were middle-aged civilians with jobs and families and normal lives they didn't want to lose. What exactly are you asking us to do? She asked. Morrison opened his laptop again and pulled up an email. The journalist I mentioned is named Rebecca Chen. She works for the Washington Examiner and has won several awards for investigative reporting. She wants to meet with all of us next week. All of us? Tom Bradley asked. Going public means giving up any hope of a normal life. We gave up normal lives 25 years ago, Rodriguez replied quietly. We just didn't realize it at the time. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark Portland streets. Morrison, what happens if we say no? What happens if we decide we don't want to be part of this? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. I think you already know the answer to that. The implication hung heavy in the air. They had all seen what happened to people who tried to walk away from Project Cerberus. Car accidents. Hiking accidents. Suicides. Random crimes in safe neighborhoods. So we're not really choosing whether to go public, Jennifer said. We're choosing how we want to die. Maybe, Morrison replied. But, if we go public together, all at the same time, with enough evidence to make the story credible, we might have a chance. Maria Santos laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're asking us to bet our lives on the power of journalism. I'm asking you to bet your lives on the truth, Morrison corrected. And, on each other. Jennifer looked around the room again. These people had been her brothers and sisters in arms once upon a time. They had shared an experience that no one else could understand. They had kept each other's secrets for 25 years. Now Morrison was asking them to break those secrets together. I need to think about it, she said finally. We all do, Sarah agreed. This isn't a decision you make in one evening. Morrison nodded. I understand. But, I need an answer from everyone by Friday. Rebecca Chen is willing to meet with us next Monday, but only if we're all committed to telling the complete story. As the meeting broke up and people began to leave, Jennifer found herself walking out with Rodriguez. His limp was more pronounced than she had first noticed, and she realized he was in constant pain. The car accident was real, he said, noticing her concern. Cerberus arranged for me to survive it, but just barely. Broken back, internal injuries, months of recovery. When I was finally able to walk again, they offered me a choice. Work for them or die for real. Something like that. So I took their money and did some consulting work for a few years? Nothing like Guatemala, just background research on potential subjects. But I kept copies of everything. They reached the street, where Sarah was waiting by Jennifer's car. Rodriguez, Sarah said, I have to ask. If you've been working with them all this time, how do we know we can trust you? Rodriguez smiled for the first time that evening. Because 3 months ago, I stopped taking their money. And, because tomorrow, I'm sending copies of everything I have to 4 different journalists, 3 congressional offices, and the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Jennifer stared at him. You're going public whether we agree to help or not. I'm going public because I'm dying, Rodriguez replied calmly. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. Which means Cerberus International can't threaten me with death anymore. He walked away into the darkness, leaving Jennifer and Sarah standing alone on the empty street. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked. Jennifer looked back at the warehouse where their former commanding officer was probably still planning their collective exposure of one of the most dangerous secrets in modern history. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that we're all going to die if we do this. And we're all going to die if we don't." Friday morning came faster than Jennifer had expected. She sat in her kitchen, staring at her phone and the text message from Morrison asking for her decision. Her husband had already left for work, and her children were at school. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows. 3 days had passed since the warehouse meeting, and Jennifer had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the subjects from Guatemala. Men and women who had been strapped to tables while Dr. Kellerman performed his experiments. People who had gone into his laboratory with their memories intact and come out as empty shells. She thought about her own life since Guatemala. The nursing career she had chosen to try to balance the scales of what she had witnessed. The family she had built, the normal existence she had created. All of it would disappear the moment she spoke publicly about Project Cerberus. But Rodriguez's words kept echoing in her mind. They were all going to die anyway. The only question was whether their deaths would serve any purpose. Jennifer picked up her phone and typed a simple message, "I'm in." She sent it to Morrison, then immediately forwarded the same message to Sarah. Within minutes, her phone rang. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked without preamble. "No," Jennifer replied honestly. "But I'm sure about what happens if we don't try. I sent Morrison my answer an hour ago. I'm in too. How many others?" "I don't know. Morrison said he'd contact everyone this morning with the final count." Jennifer looked out her kitchen window at the quiet suburban street where she had lived for 15 years. Her neighbors were going about their normal Friday routines, unaware that one of them was about to become part of a story that would change everything they thought they knew about their government and their safety. "Sarah, I need to ask you something. Do you really think we can trust Morrison? I mean, he kept all those documents for 25 years without telling any of us. What if this is some kind of setup?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I've been wondering the same thing. But, Jennifer, what choice do we have? If Morrison is working for Cerberus, they already know where we are and what we're doing. If he's not, then he's our only chance to get this story out." An hour later, Jennifer received another text from Morrison. 7 of the 8 warehouse attendees had agreed to meet with Rebecca Chen. Only Tom Bradley had decided he couldn't risk it. Meeting Monday 2 p.m. downtown Portland. Federal Building, Conference Room 412. Chen bringing 2 colleagues and recording equipment. Recommend you prepare written statements in advance. Jennifer stared at the message. The Federal Building. That meant Chen had somehow gotten official support for her investigation. Journalists didn't normally have access to government conference rooms unless someone with serious authority was involved. That afternoon, Jennifer called in sick to work and drove to the Portland Public Library. She spent 4 hours in the computer section, researching everything she could find about Rebecca Chen and the Washington Examiner. Chen was 38 years old and had been working as an investigative journalist for 12 years. She had broken stories about government surveillance programs, corporate cover-ups of environmental disasters, and illegal human experimentation by pharmaceutical companies. Most importantly, she had a track record of protecting her sources even when threatened with legal action. The Washington Examiner was a legitimate news organization with a history of publishing stories that embarrassed powerful people and institutions. If Chen's article was published there, it would be seen by millions of people and picked up by other news organizations around the world. But Jennifer also discovered something that made her stomach clench with worry. 2 of Chen's major sources in previous investigations had died in suspicious circumstances after her stories were published. One in a house fire that investigators couldn't explain. Another in a mugging gone wrong in a safe neighborhood. Jennifer spent Saturday writing her statement about Guatemala. She tried to include every detail she could remember about the facility, the experiments, and the people involved. She wrote about Dr. Kellerman's procedures, about the subjects who had been brought to the facility, about the promises Morrison had made to keep them all safe. By Sunday evening, she had 12 pages of single-space text that documented 3 months of her life that she had tried for 25 years to forget. That night, she had the dream again. The one that had haunted her for decades. She was back in the underground laboratory, watching Dr. Kellerman strap a young woman to the table. The woman was crying and, speaking in Spanish, begging for someone to help her. Jennifer tried to move, tried to intervene, but her feet wouldn't obey her commands. She woke up at 3 in the morning, covered in sweat and shaking. Her husband stirred beside her but didn't wake up. Jennifer went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, looking at herself in the mirror. Tomorrow, she would walk into a federal building and tell a journalist everything she knew about one of the most classified projects in U.S. military history. Tomorrow, she would become a traitor to some people and a hero to others. Tomorrow, her old life would end. Monday afternoon found Jennifer, Sarah, Rodriguez, Maria Santos, and 3 other survivors sitting around a conference table in the federal building. Rebecca Chen was younger than Jennifer had expected, with short black hair and intense dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Chen had brought 2 colleagues with her, a photographer who was documenting everything, and a man who introduced himself only as a research specialist but whom Jennifer suspected was some kind of government official. "Before we begin," Chen said, "I need everyone to understand what we're dealing with here. Based on preliminary research, Cerberus International has connections to intelligence agencies, major corporations, and foreign governments. Publishing this story will make enemies of very powerful people." She looked around the table at each of them. "I also need you to understand that once this story is published, your lives will change completely. You'll be targets for retaliation, but you'll also be public figures. There will be congressional hearings, criminal investigations, and media attention that will last for years." Morrison leaned forward. "Miss Chen, we understand the risks. The question is whether you're prepared to publish a story that will probably end your career and possibly endanger your life." Chen smiled grimly. "Mr. Morrison, I've been preparing for this story for 3 years. Ever since a dying man contacted me with documents about something called Project Cerberus." Jennifer felt her blood run cold. "Who?" "Staff Sergeant David Chen. No relation to me, despite the name. He reached out through intermediaries in 2022, claiming to have evidence of illegal human experimentation by the U.S. military. He died before I could interview him, but he left behind detailed records of his time working for Cerberus International." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "Chen was my friend. We served together in Alpha Company. When he tried to leave Cerberus, they killed him." "Can you prove that?" Chen asked. "Not directly. But I have recordings of conversations with Cerberus personnel discussing permanent solutions for uncooperative former employees." Chen activated a digital recorder and placed it in the center of the table. "Then, let's start with those recordings." For the next 4 hours, the survivors of Project Cerberus told their stories. Rodriguez played his recordings of conversations with Cerberus recruiters and handlers. Maria Santos presented financial documents showing how money had been moved between government agencies and private contractors to fund the Guatemala facility. Jennifer read her written statement about the medical procedures she had witnessed, describing in clinical detail how Dr. Kellerman had modified and erased the memories of dozens of subjects. Sarah provided technical documentation about the communication systems used at the facility, including records of transmissions between Guatemala and facilities in other countries. Morrison presented his treasure trove of documents from 1998, including photographs, personnel records, and mission briefings that proved the official story about their deployment had been completely false. As the afternoon wore on, Jennifer began to realize the scope of what they were revealing. Project Cerberus hadn't been a single rogue operation. It had been the beginning of a systematic program of memory modification that had been expanded and commercialized over the past 25 years. The current client list for Cerberus International includes 3 intelligence agencies, 12 major corporations, and at least 6 foreign governments, Chen explained, showing them documents her research team had obtained. They're not just erasing traumatic memories anymore. They're modifying the memories of whistleblowers, witnesses to corporate crimes, and political dissidents. Rodriguez coughed, a harsh sound that reminded everyone of his terminal diagnosis. It's worse than that. They're creating false memories too. Implanting recollections that never happened. I've seen them turn loyal employees into corporate spies by making them remember instructions that were never given. The implications of what he was describing hit Jennifer like a physical blow. If Cerberus International could implant false memories, then no testimony was reliable. No witness could be trusted. The very foundation of truth and justice was under attack. How many people do you estimate have been affected? Chen asked. Morrison consulted his notes. Based on the capacity of facilities I've been able to identify, and the client volume Cerberus International claims on their corporate filings, I'd estimate somewhere between 10 and 50,000 people over the past 25 years. The room fell silent. 50,000 people whose memories had been modified or erased. 50,000 victims of a crime that most people didn't even know was possible. What's our timeline for publication? Sarah asked. Chen checked her phone. Cerberus International goes public in 3 weeks. If we're going to stop that, we need to publish within 10 days. And what happens after publication? Jennifer asked. Congressional hearings, certainly. Probably FBI and CIA investigations. International human rights organizations will get involved. There will be lawsuits, criminal charges, and diplomatic incidents. Chen leaned forward. But there will also be retaliation. Cerberus International has assets worth billions of dollars and connections throughout the government and intelligence communities. They will not go quietly. Rodriguez coughed again, more violently this time. When he caught his breath, he looked around the table with a determined expression. Let them come, he said quietly. I'm dying anyway. But maybe, if we do this right, we can make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else. The meeting concluded with Chen promising to have a draft article ready for review within 48 hours. She would be coordinating with other journalists at major news organizations to ensure the story received maximum exposure and couldn't be suppressed by legal challenges. As they left the federal building, Jennifer found herself walking with Sarah toward the parking garage. Do you think it will work? Sarah asked. Jennifer looked back at the building where they had just documented 25 years of secrets and lies. I think it doesn't matter, she replied. We've done what we should have done 25 years ago. We've told the truth. What happens next is up to other people. 2 weeks later, Jennifer was sitting in her living room watching the evening news when the story broke. Rebecca Chen's investigation was the lead story on every major news network, with headlines like Secret Government Program Erased Memories of Thousands and Survivors Expose 25-Year Cover-Up of Human Experimentation. The article was devastating in its detail and scope. Chen had not only documented Project Cerberus and its evolution into Cerberus International, but had also identified dozens of other victims and several government officials who had been involved in the cover-up. Within hours of publication, Cerberus International's stock offering was suspended. FBI agents raided the company's offices in 12 cities. 3 U.S. senators called for immediate congressional hearings. Jennifer's phone began ringing and didn't stop. Reporters, investigators, lawyers, and strangers who claimed to be former subjects of memory modification. She turned off her phone and sat with her family, watching their quiet life transform into something unrecognizable. Her husband held her hand as the news anchors described her as a courageous whistleblower and a hero who risked everything to expose the truth. Are you okay? He asked. Jennifer thought about Rodriguez, who had died 2 days earlier, just long enough to see the beginning of the storm he had helped create. She thought about the subjects in Guatemala whose names she had never learned but whose faces she would never forget. No, she said honestly. But, for the first time in 25 years, I'm not carrying their secrets anymore. Outside, she could see news vans gathering on her quiet street. Tomorrow, the world would want to hear every detail of her story. There would be hearings and trials and investigations that could last for years. But tonight, for the first time since 1998, Jennifer Walsh could sleep without dreaming of three-headed dogs guarding the gates of hell.